and maybe we'll have a few more jump on. But welcome everyone. I hope everyone is doing well. I'm Paula Bonney from Let's Grow Kids, and we're really glad to have you with us today for our session of Resilience, Strength, and Creating Positive Change in Early Childhood with Ellen Drolette of Positive Spin Vermont. Ellen has over 26 years of diverse experience in the early childhood field and works as a professional consultant, and she is already very familiar to a good number of us, so super excited to have her here. Just a few things before we get started. We realize that a number of people have been attending webinars during this time at home, although not everyone is needing professional development hours with Northern Lights. If you are wanting credit with Northern Lights, I just want to make sure you added your BFIS number to the registration, and you will need to attend the full training session to get credit, and then you'll be included on the attendance that I submit. During the webinar, participants will be muted and video will be off. And we will use the Q&A, and Ellen, you can chime in after and let people know on what you prefer. But use the Q&A for questions that you have during the webinar, take notes, and then later we'll try to open up. Ellen will answer questions along the way as she can, and then later toward the end we'll also have a little bit of time just to open up so we can have a little more conversation. So now I think we're good to go, and let's get started with Ellen.
Okay. And if you haven't added your BFIS number, Paula, do you want them to add it into the chat? Do you want them to put it into the questions box?
I would say not the chat. I'm hoping most people did because it was required on the registration form. If for some reason it wasn't included, somebody forgot to add it, I'm wondering if you can send me an email. Maria, I don't know if you think there's a best way to add it for anyone who's missed it.
I think putting it right in the Q&A will be fine. We can keep track of it there.
Okay, thank you.
So, and I believe there was a question about attendance, and attendance is going to be taken probably now and at the end, but you do have to stay for the entire session.
So what happens with attendance is when you join a webinar, it does record when you've logged on and then when you end your session. And we just want to make sure, we're really grateful that Northern Lights has approved the use of an online platform for professional development, even though it's temporary. It is great to be able to use this. So we are trying to make sure that it's treated similarly to in-person sessions. So anyone would be expected to attend the full session. And then Zoom keeps track of the attendance for us in a sense. And then we will look at that and submit to Northern Lights.
All right, so we've got the housekeeping issues out of the way for now. If you have any other questions, you can just throw them up there and I'll try to go to them as I'm able to. So I'm just gonna go to share screen so that I can get my PowerPoint up here. All right, so I did get a little introduction there. So I was really excited to do this, to have this opportunity, and I'll get into more of why that is as we get in. But oops, sorry, I'm messing around with buttons here. So I have a family childcare program, and first and foremost, that's my regular gig, and Positive Spin is my side gig. So I don't remember a time when I never did have a side gig. And so if people want to get in touch with me, these are the ways to get in touch with me. And I'm pulling up boxes, and there we go. All right. So if you want to get in touch with me, that's the way. A little bit about me. I have been in early care and education for over 25 years, 27 years exactly. I have two children that are 28 and 26, almost 27, and a grandchild. and they both live in Massachusetts. So we're empty nesters right now. So I'm sure that my reality looks a little different than everybody else's right now. And I'm going to talk about that a little later too. I also wrote a book, Overcoming Teacher Burnout, and it focuses a lot on strategies, which is what we're going to talk about today. And so I apologize if the light isn't great here, but it's all I've got. All right, so we are going to get started. So this is my tribe, and I share this because I want you to know that this is my world, just like yours. I am probably feeling a lot of the same feelings that you're feeling, missing them like crazy. You know, the first week I was like, oh, this isn't bad. Get a little break from them, you know, this is nice. But as time goes on, I'm missing them desperately. The Zoom calls aren't quite doing it. And yeah, I'll talk more about them later. But so this is my group, and they're a multi-age group. And so I feel what you're going through, and I just wanted you to know that I'm walking the same walk along with you. So we're going to work on building a resilience toolbox, and you already have a toolbox whether you know it or not, but you have tools in it that probably need to be sharpened, maybe replaced. It's what happens over time. We hear the words like bounced back when we hear people talking about resilience, about how quickly someone bounces back from something. And that's absolutely what resilience is about. We want to, it's going to feel like we're talking a lot about really touchy-feely stuff today, but I want you to know it's all rooted in research. And so while it does feel touchy-feely and feelings and all of that, it definitely, there's a reason for it. The practices allow us to really dig deep and become stronger in times of despair and trauma. So none of the tools are meant, though, to take away sadness or fear or anger. You know, keeping in mind that as we talk about resilience, that we, like I have a mouse in my pocket, I always want people to feel their feelings. It's not about not feeling sad or not feeling angry. You still need to feel those feelings. So the idea is to have knowledge and understanding about where you are sort of in this process and understanding where you're going, and being prepared about what's ahead for you. So as we kind of move into this, I want to make sure that everybody has paper and a pen, because you're going to need it in a little bit as we move through this. And I'm sorry that I keep saying it's because I've got a lot going on here. So here we go. And these are my children, by the way, my grown-up children. They don't know I'm using their pictures. So we're going to dive into fear and anxieties that we're all sharing. We're going to create some positive strategies. We all have stories about vulnerability. And whenever anybody brings out vulnerability, courage, bravery, the first person that pops into their head is Brene Brown. And so she will get mentioned today as well. One of the things that Brene Brown says is that before we're vulnerable, we need to have courage to show up and share. Opening up and being vulnerable is the birthplace of love and joy. And I really liked the way that sounded. So as we move forward, a lot has changed since we, had to close in mid-March. And we've had a lot of emotions and feelings because of that. And later on, I'll share some of those with you. I went back to a blog that I had started to write. And when I sat down to write it, I wasn't sure if it was going to be a blog or an article, but I sat down really feeling the need to write. And when I did, I realized that I was having all kinds of feelings about this. And I'm going to share that with you a little bit later, but it really, as I was going back to prepare for this training, it really sort of resonated with the fact that we really need this. There's so many people, I think, that were feeling the same way that I was. And that way was, I'm not really sure how to explain it, was what the emotion was. there were ups and downs, and the first couple of weeks of navigating all this was really, really difficult. So I'm sure that you all know exactly what I'm talking about. So daring greatly means the courage to be vulnerable. It needs to show up and be seen, to ask what you need, to talk about how you're feeling, to have the hard conversations. And vulnerability is hard work. It involves you having to show your feelings, which sometimes you might not always do. It involves sort of that idea that being vulnerable is negative, but it's not. And it's hard work. So I want you to know that this is a safe place. And if you're not feeling like it's a safe place, know that I'm available as a resource. You know, you can catch me by email, but these are hard conversations because they are about feelings, and feelings are not always everybody's gig. Although as early educators, we talk a lot about feelings. So what's been the most difficult for me right now is the idea that we have to keep 6 feet apart from people. We see them from a distance, and I will tell you that I was texting with a mom the other day, and she said that she thought she saw another teacher that works here, Renee. She thought she saw Renee across a park, and she had to do everything she could to hold herself back from running across the park, grabbing the person and hugging her, thinking that it was her, that it was Renee. And she said, so, you know, she has to be careful about where she goes. I had offered her to stop by and grab some materials for her daughter, and she said, oh, I'm going to have to send my husband because I can't. I might come in and have to sit down and talk to you and not be 6 feet apart. So these are times that are so hard for us as we try to navigate this. We are, you know, we are those people that have to just like, you know, latch on to these kids, and they just like climb on us. They become appendages at some points. And, you know, I know it's what I'm craving right now is I'm missing my own kids and my granddaughter and the children that come here. So another thing that happened a couple of weeks ago that was so hard to explain to a child was I had dropped off materials at another house, and the 4.5-year-old whispered to his mom, and she's like, I know we talked about this, like we can't hug right now. And it was just a really hard conversation. And, you know, I'm not sure where the guidance is going to go in terms of when we reopen. I certainly hope it's not going to be that we can't hug children and squeeze them and snuggle them, because that's not what we're about. But it is, this has been probably one of the more difficult pieces to think about as we move forward. So I wanted to acknowledge that, because this has definitely been super difficult. So, as I was saying, you know, April 2nd was the day that I kind of found myself on the computer, and I was thinking about all of these feelings of helplessness and guilt, guilt because I had to close even though there was nothing I could do about it, helpless because I couldn't be an essential childcare provider because I have really bad asthma. So I was just thinking about all of these feelings, and you know, I'm wondering, you know, if any of these, I'm going to give you a minute to kind of look at these emotions and see if any of them resonate with you. I just want you to take a minute and take a look. Or maybe all of them. So one thing that I've been interested in a lot is kind of looking at when there's change, you know, what does that, how does that affect us? And so in one of my previous projects, we had looked at my old business partner and I had looked at the idea about the grief model, the Elizabeth Kubler-Ross grief model. And she was a psychiatrist that studied death and dying and grief. And later on, I realized that she also had moved towards this idea that there was also a sort of a grief model that mimicked the grief model, but it was more of on a change curve. And so if we look at the grief model, and the latitude line is time, so where we are in the present and then maybe where we're going in the future. So that's the latitude line. And then the longitude line is, active or more passive in terms of the emotion. So this is the grief model. And although it was shown as a curve, one of the things that was really interesting was that there's so many ways that it can kind of look like a ribbon, and you kind of go through these places, but then you come back to them, or it could look like a cycle where you revisit some of these feelings as you go through the process. So as I was thinking about this, and I was thinking about all these feelings I was having, I was like, well, maybe this is what I'm feeling. Because I certainly have felt it around other things. And the conversations I've had in the past when I've taught other groups is, when the mentoring program stopped, or when the regulations changed, people are kind of feeling it as STARS is going to be changing a little bit. And as people were going through these processes, it really felt like there was this place where people were definitely dealing with some grief, and identifying where they were in that was really important, because then it allowed them to see that they had felt all of these feelings. And this is where I'm going. And okay, well, if I think about that as what's happening, then I know that there's an end in sight to this. So if you look at the change curve, it is a little bit different. The change curve is a model that's used a lot with businesses and organizations when there's change. And it's primarily used to understand how people are feeling, because as we know, people go through change at a different pace. We can't expect that everybody's going to accept something at the same rate. So change is different for everyone. Some people may stay frustrated much longer than maybe I would. And that has a lot to do with resilience. It has a lot to do with a lot of other factors that we're not going to go deeply into. But I think it's interesting. It's an interesting concept to think about as we're thinking about change, as we're moving forward, and how we're going to learn to work in a new situation moving forward. What are the changes that are going to be put in place? Are there going to be changes put in place? What are the expectations going to be? So I felt like that was really important to share for you. The other thing in terms of grief, and this was an article that was going around Facebook. It was called "That Discomfort You're Feeling is Grief," which was, I think it went viral because it really hit home for a lot of people. And there was a couple of things that were new to me, and that was the idea of collective grief, that, collectively as a world, we're all sort of grieving this idea of normal. We're kind of collectively grieving what used to be. And then we're also have this anticipatory grief, which is like, we're still uncertain about what the future holds. And as I was thinking more deeply about this, I was thinking about people that have had to cancel their weddings and vacations and visits with families. And my own situation, my parents are in North Carolina and usually come up in May for the summer, and that's not happening. So, there's changes in the way that we're doing everything that we've normally done. And so there's definitely grief in that. And I don't think that we've ever really put a name on it. So I think it's important that we do put a name on it and acknowledge it. So these are just some of the quotes that came out of that article. And there is a link to the article. If you put in "the discomfort you're feeling is grief," it will come right up. But it was definitely a very good one to read about. Thinking about in terms of anticipatory grief too. And I I would be interested in researching it a little more, is knowing if, you know, as we anticipate what's coming up next, if we visualize a different outcome, will we feel differently about it? Will we grieve? So I'm interested to kind of look into some of those ideas and research that. So it's funny because it's been a tough year. I would have said that in January for myself. It's been a tough year, but I learned a lot about myself, and I'm betting that you're all learning a lot about yourself right now. And I can say that by about January 15th, I was saying that it had been a tough year. I had been sick for October through February. I had been sick with a pretty bad respiratory infection, which caused me to be asthmatic for the first time ever in my life. And I had been to Nashville, I had been sick, I had been to the ER 9 times, prednisone 4 times. So it had been a rough few months. And I thought it was a rough start to 2020, but I hadn't anticipated this at all, not even a little bit. So, and then there was this angel devil feeling like, oh, you shouldn't feel that way because you should be so grateful for everything you have. And then you start to feel guilty for it. So again, it's like allowing yourself to feel these things, but then saying, I'm resilient, I can bounce back from this. But not scolding yourself for having the things that you have and being grateful, but acknowledging that, yes, that really sucked, but I can move on from it. All right, so this is where we're going to use one of the strategies that we're going to talk about today, and it's visualizing and reflecting. Sorry about my voice. So even if you grew up in an environment that wasn't ideal to develop resilience, it's never too late to build that up. In moments of stress, it's useful to take your situation and kind of look at it and give it perspective. So that's what we're going to do. So we're going to do this little visualization exercise. You like my music? So what I'm going to have you do is just kind of sit back and close your eyes. Just kind of listen and just visualize. I want you to slowly zoom out of the building you're in. Out of the place, zoom out of the country, even the continent. Zoom out even further, all the way through the ozone layer. Until you reach the moon, and you can see the whole earth below you. I want you to think about your problems. What does it look like from outer space? How big does it look from outer space? All right, I'm going to bring you back down to earth. All right, so I'm bringing you back here now. And I'm wondering, you know, in terms of perspective, one of the things that sometimes we lose is that perspective when we're having issues and dealing with, you know, how we can be more resilient. Our problems might seem really, really large, and a lot of times they are. but also we have this ability to, and I'm going to talk about it later, so I'm not going to go too far into it, but tell ourselves a story of how much bigger it is. And I'll talk to you about that later. I don't want to give away my secrets now. So, sorry, started my music again. So what character strengths have we drawn on to pull ourselves through some of the emotional ups and downs? And so as you think about character strengths, I'm going to give you a list of them, and I'm going to give you some time to kind of look through them and think about what of those strengths you think that you've used. I want you to pick like 3 of your top ones that have really kind of spoke to you as you've gone through the last few months. What have you needed to draw on? And do you think it's changed over the last few months? So I'm going to pull up that list. Also, before we talk about more about character strength, you know, character strength is a positive trait. Usually it's reflected in our behaviors. It's a combination of our talents and our patterns and our feelings and our behaviors. And we can strengthen our skills. So one of the things we're going to talk about are our resilience skills. So I want you to take a look at this list, and I want you to look at, these are all character strengths. And I want you to look at the first word are the character strengths, and the words after are sort of describing what that looks like. And I want you to just we're going to take some time, and I want you to read through it and think about 3 that really describe what has helped you through the last couple of months. So I'm going to give you some time to do that. So I'm going to mute myself while you do that. Sorry, I don't know what just happened. Hold on. Got a messed up slide there. All right. So I'm assuming that you probably had time to read through these. Paula, did I give enough time? You can shake your head yes or no. Okay. Paula is the only person I can actually see. So, I can't really interact with you, so I'm going to move on. So you probably have picked a couple of these, and I realize that my next slide is kind of messed up, so I'm going to. So research studies have shown that those who think about their highest value before a stressful event actually experience less stress and show a substantial decrease in the stress hormone of cortisol compared to control groups. And this is, you know, again, all based in research, and I'm sharing at the end of the PowerPoint, there's a lot of links that link you up with these studies. And one of the things that I found really interesting, and I've done this a few times, is there is a website, and it's www.viacharacter.org. And what it does is that it has you go through, if you go on it, do the free survey, and it's a way for, it's almost like a survey to figure out what your character strengths are. And what this does is that it allows you to kind of reflect on those. And what was interesting was that mine had changed from 2 years ago, which was interesting. And when I've done values exercises with people, you know, their values can change from a year or 2 years ago based on what they're dealing with at this moment in time. So it's interesting to think about our strengths and what maybe we've honed in on over time that has gotten stronger. So I definitely urge you to check out that website and do the survey, and I'd love to know what your results are and what you did with that. I'm going to go past that. So what are resilience skills? And these, I did a lot of research on this and was, you know, trying to figure out like what is it about resilience and what skills do people need to really get through it? And I thought about it in terms of our Strengthening Families framework that many of us are familiar with, and resilience is a big part of the work we do in terms of strengthening families. And talking about protective factors. And this is very similar to that. So when we look at resilience skills, there's connection, self-awareness, strength of character, self-regulation, mental agility, and optimism. Resilience is not a skill, as I told you in the beginning, that makes hurt and disappointment give away. Having good resilience just allows for a person to look beyond the problem and know they'll find enjoyment past the problem. So resilience skills. Connection. Connection is people belonging to organizations, teams, clubs, family, community. So we talk about our little tribes that we have in our own tiny communities of our childcare programs, our teachers, our friends. And these connections are supportive and they have opportunity for meaningful engagement. So when we think about connection in those first few weeks that we were going through all of this, there was a lot of connection that happened over these virtual networks that has been pretty astounding. And we've probably had more connection with family and friends and colleagues than we've had in years. And that's been exciting too. I think that we're all sort of navigating this new way of doing things and figuring out that it actually can work. So connection is definitely one of those pieces of resilience and having this skill that is really important. Self-awareness. When a person is aware of their strengths, they're aware of their own sort of confidence, their areas for improvement, they know about what they care about deeply and their feelings. That's being self-aware. Being self-aware is also being able to look at that in somebody else as well. So being self-aware is that understanding of who I am and where I need areas for improvement. The strength of character. I looked up synonyms for this because it was an interesting one. So I had to do some research on really looking at strength of character, and it's the ability to use one's top character strengths to engage with others authentically, overcome challenges, and create a life aligned with your values. And I thought that was like so interesting. And again, speaks to that place of knowing what your character strengths are and, you know, knowing who you are as a person and how they align with your values. And that's my friend Simone. So self-regulation. So when I had done the character strengths previously, for whatever reason, and I don't remember where it fell on the list, self-regulation was not at the top of my list. So I thought, what is that saying about me? That I don't have good self-regulation. I thought about a lot of things in terms of what that meant about me. I sort of pictured myself as a 2-year-old not having good self-regulation skills. So apparently self-regulation skills is not one of my top character strengths. So I'll be interested to find out how you all are. But research shows that self-regulation is a good indicator of resilience. And we can kind of understand why that is as we are looking at the full scope of everything. When we work on self-regulation, it sort of encourages our capacity to have sort of an optimistic life plan. And again, all based in this whole idea of research and studies and all of that. I'm going through my papers. Mental agility or mental toughness, the measure of an individual resilience and confidence that may predict success in sports, education, and the workplace. And so many times when I'm talking about skills and appreciative inquiry principles, which if any of you are going to the mini conference or attending online, the mini conference that I'm part of next week, I'm going to be talking a lot about appreciative inquiry principles. And one of the things is talking not about mental agility so much as it is about the anticipation, positivity, and all of those pieces that you need to sort of create this framework of appreciative inquiring. And so when I thought about mental agility, the first thing I did think of was an athlete that just has that mental toughness to get the job done. And you can really understand why that would be a resilience skill. My daughter, who is right here, she was a lacrosse goalie. And which was probably one of my hardest things, not hardest, but one of the more difficult things as a parent was to watch her play in goal and get nailed by balls all the time. And also just watch her sort of mental capacity when balls would go by her and it might have been an easy save, but she would miss it, and how hard she was on herself. But over the 8 years that she played, she built up this mental toughness about her and came to this realization in her time that, you know, it has to get past all of these lines in order to get to her. And even though they're depending on her as the last line of defense. So it took like mental agility and toughness to kind of get through that. And I sort of think of that also as when we're dealing with families, that sometimes there's difficulties and we're having to have difficult conversations, that when we first try to have those conversations, it's something that's really difficult to do. But over time, we develop this resilience and this ability to do it because we get mentally tough and we understand how to use words and carefully tread to have these difficult conversations. So optimism is one of my favorite words. Optimism is I think it's one of my superpowers most of the time. It's powerful when human beings grow their capacity to see and focus on the goodness in themselves and others and the world. Their social, emotional, and cognitive superpowers emerge. In the life-changing relationship business, optimism is a required, pragmatic, and evidence-based approach to overcoming adversity. Whew, I love that. So evidence-based. So these are words that came out of the Life is Good Playmakers program, and you know they talk a lot about optimism when they're talking about their program, and the reason is because they're working with children that have really been through some traumatic circumstances, natural disasters, illness, and you know, optimism is what we have to have when we go in to work with children who have had, you know, adverse childhood experiences. Sometimes the the time that they're spending with us might be that only joyful time that they're having. So we have to approach that with sort of this idea of this powerful optimism, and giving them sort of these joy-filled connections. So optimism. So these are our resilience skills as we move forward. So what we're going to do next is we're going to create a personal resilience plan. So this is an activity that we're going to do. So when we do a plan like this, it's almost, whenever I do a plan like this, it's almost like doing an individual professional development plan, and all of the frameworks are usually the same on these in terms of all of the improvement plans we do. We do program improvement plans, we do individual professional development plans, we have to do those improvement plans for our environmental ratings. So there's so many plans that we do, but this is a personal resilience plan. And what we're going to do is we're going to take some time to really work through that. So hopefully you have a blank piece of paper in front of you. And what I want to do is you're going to create one of these. Okay, so you're going to take you're going to maybe draw a picture of yourself right in the middle of your paper. So if you have your paper and pencil, that's what I want you to do. First thing I want you to do is to draw a picture of yourself. And it can be very simple. So from that picture of yourself, whatever it might look like, hopefully you have different colors to play with. I want you to draw some arrows to up what were those 3 character strengths that you picked out were. What were they? And by the way, I believe that these were my 3 character strengths when I did the survey. So we're going to call those your superpowers, because those, and you can replace these with your top 3 after you've done the character survey, but these are your superpowers. These are what we know that you kind of have. We know you have that. Well, then we have the resiliency skills and all of the ones that we just talked about. And what I want you to do is take a minute to sort of reflect on everything we've just talked about and pick 2. Don't do the goals yet, but just pick 2. And write those down, much in the same way we have here. I have here. Oops, sorry guys. Sorry, my screen keeps going ahead because I'm looking around. Okay. So as you picked out your resiliency skills, your 2, what I want you to do now is in a box next to those is just choose a goal for each about what that would look like for you personally. You don't, not mine, but yours. So what about connection would you want to work on, or self-awareness, or strength of character, self-regulation, mental agility? You know, what parts of those would you want to really connect with? So for me, one of my goals was around paying attention to sort of my reactions to people's point of views and listening and paying attention to my own facial expressions. I think sometimes my facial expressions give away more than they should in terms of a reaction. And so sometimes I need to kind of bring those in a little bit. So that was mine. And in terms of connection, you know, strengthening existing relationships, reach out to one person that I've lost touch with, or just be better about reaching out to the people that consistently reach out to me, because it's not something I'm good at. So I think for me, it's recognizing that and putting it down as a goal of something that I want to achieve. So I would love to use the Q&A box, and I don't know if we can use it for this. I'm going to assume that we can, but I'd love to use the Q&A box to see if you all would start by just kind of popcorn sharing what some of your character strengths were. You don't have to share all three, but maybe one of them. That would be great. Ooh, I like that, Natanya. Curiosity, love of learning, perseverance, curiosity, leadership, curiosity. So many of you are curious. Creativity. Excellent. Oh, Julie, I like that. Okay.
We have a couple over in the chat box too.
Oh, okay, good. I'll go over there too. I'm interested to, oh, amazing. Humor. Gotta have humor. I am interested to see when you all take the character survey to see how they matched up. If they matched up, how much they did. April, belonging. I already knew that about you. Gratitude, curiosity. Love it. Awesome. So the next question for me would be, what two resiliency skills did you choose to work on? And you can share those. I love it when I know the people that are answering and I love their answers. Yeah. I'm glad to see I'm not the only one that needs to work on the self-regulation part. That's probably my self-awareness of my faces that I make. And optimism and mental agility, Trish, go so hand in hand. Thank you for sharing. I'm gonna just go over to the chat box for 1 second. Great. Awesome. I needed to make sure that you were all still awake and with me. And you are, so that's good. Okay. So this is a resilience plan. And this was, you know, another way of kind of looking at the strengths that you have and what you can work on, just like when we do our other, you know, personal development planning. And, you know, you could go even further with this you could take your goals and you could think about resources and what would I need to do to reach this goal, and how would I know that I've met this goal? So there's lots of different ways you can go with a plan like this. And I think that it's a really good reminder for us that we have these skills. And so we do have, we are able to bounce back. So one of the practices I gave you in the beginning was the visualization. And I wanted to just kind of take a moment to step back and reflect on that as well. The visualization was the idea of removing yourself out of a situation, putting yourself out in, you know, outer space on the moon and having you look back. It was like that picture of the eye and the person sitting out on the cliff. So, you know, when you do that visualization and you look back at what some of the, you know, bigger things you're dealing with are, how did they look to you? Did they seem smaller? Did they give you a different perspective, or did it just not work at all? I'm interested in knowing that. So in the Q&A box, if you could just give me some input on that practice. And again, understanding while you're answering that, that anything that we call a practice is actually a practice. It's not something that comes easily to people. It's like people that become yoga instructors, it doesn't happen overnight. They have to put hours and hours in. And so as we think about that, I want you to just kind of keep that in the back of your mind, that like visualization, meditation, any of these things that we talk about don't happen quickly. So has anyone answered? I don't see that anybody's answered that. So my question was just more about visualization. How did that work for you? Okay, here's one. Okay, Susan, I love the way you thought about that. And that's so true with meditation. So Susan said it made her see her problems as small, but some of them started coming out to join her and she had to put them back on earth. And I love that, because the same thing happens in meditation. Your mind starts to wander and you have to keep bringing yourself back and say, no, I'm back here. This is where I'm staying. So yeah, same thing. It's a hard thing to do, but it does take practice. Okay, here we go. I like that. Okay. So one of the things Trish shared was that the issue seems so small, but in real life, they are all consuming. And I had a conversation with somebody recently about these, you know, issues being all consuming and, you know, how difficult that is for her. And one of the things that was happening was that she was going into these wormholes on Facebook where everybody was talking about all of the things that we're dealing with in terms of early childhood and the stabilization payments and essential workers and all of the things. And I had said that I needed to take a step back out of some of the groups just by not even going on them, because they were all consuming and bringing me down. And I had to kind of step back, even though it was not intentional by any of the people in the group. It was just the reality of the world we're in right now. So, you know, thinking about the wormholes we go down into, because those wormholes do become all consuming. And we really need to kind of just step back out of that and not own all of the problems, but only own our own. And remember, like, we don't own the system's problems. So thanks all for sharing. So So your resilience plan is another practice. Knowing, resilience skills will enable you to strengthen in other areas and draw on those strengths to work with others. And as I started to talk about practice and people that do yoga, an example I use many times, and when I'm not in New England, people glare at me, but I use Tom Brady a lot. And if you're not a Brady fan, I apologize, but of course he's not in New England anymore, so it's not going to be as relevant. But one of the things that we know is that you do not become the greatest of all time without practice and without perseverance. So knowing that all of these practices are just that meditation, visualization, creating a resilience plan that you're going to follow are all practices that we have to do. It's a habit. So just understanding that it doesn't come easy. It's something that you have to work at. And I talk about self-care in that way as well. When we talk about self-care, many people are like, oh, I'm going to get, a massage and that's my self-care. And self-care is not one and done. Self-care is a practice and it has to be practiced every single day. Self-care for some people looks like, drinking, the amount of water they should every single day. Self-care maybe just going for a walk to the corner and back. So self-care is really deeper than that. It's deeper than the once and done. All right, so when we were talking about, when I was thinking about this and the training and how we were going to sort of go forward with it, one of the things that I knew was that I wanted to make sure everyone knew how much I had spent researching this and researching the research that had been done around all of these practices, and understanding that there's been studies done. Now, anything we know about studies is that, we don't know who funds the studies all the time, and our attention tends to go to the place that we're most interested in. And I'm most interested in positive psychology and appreciative inquiry. So my lens tends to go to that place of wanting to know that research. So in thinking about the research, one of the things I looked a lot into is practicing gratitude. And this is one of those practices that some people have a really hard time getting into. And then other people start the practice and they're just so good at it. So every time a person expresses or receives gratitude, dopamine releases into the brain. I said that earlier. And it makes the connection between the behavior and the feeling good. So the more a person practices gratitude, the more dopamine is released. So it really makes a lot of sense as to why we would want to practice gratitude and what that would look like for people. So I want to talk about that a little bit. So some of the studies that were done, and this is all, through positive psychology and other areas, but these were all different studies that were done. People studied, if you're happier, do you live longer? Can gratitude, predict hope and happiness? There were so many ways of looking at this and looking at the neutral groups, and it's fascinating stuff. But so one of the studies that was done by a psychologist, researcher, Sonia Lyubomirsky, did tell us that we can increase our longevity with happiness. And so what she did was she looked at genetic happiness as a set point. So genetic happiness is looking at, our genetics determine our personalities. And Her theory is that 50% of our genetics is a set point, and we have genetic happiness. Intentional activities would be those activities, those practices we put into place that account for 40% of our happiness. So even if our genetics, maybe our happiness set point is really low, we still have that 40% that we can really hold on to. So we can better our well-being through practices and increase our happiness. And then the 10% that's left over accounts for just the reasons we're happy. It depends on the circumstances, who we're surrounded with, and how this encourages or inhibits skills and opportunities for us to achieve happiness. So there was like extensive research done. And, you know, I think about how cool it would be to just like research happiness. Let's make you feel so good. So it's fascinating stuff. And, you know, it does take that look into that sort of genetic understanding of, you know, adverse childhood experiences and how much of that is genetically predisposed. So, you know, even if we have had that and maybe the genetic happiness isn't a high set point, then maybe these practices are going to be really important to the work that we do. And then I pulled out a quote from the researcher that did this work. So about gratitude, because that is going to be the next practice that we talk about. First of all, you know, gratitude, you know, you can do gratitudes when you're laying on a yoga mat, meditating. You can do gratitudes in a journal, a notebook, a Word document, a running list. And I wanted to share with you a couple of things that I have. There's the 1 minute gratitude journal, literally 1 minute. So again, research has shown that this is what it looks like on the inside, literally this right here. But research has shown that over time, the more you pay attention and take part in a practice of gratitude, there is this increased happiness and positivity. This literally I found on Amazon, and it does give you little prompts inside it, which is really cool. The other thing I wanted to share was my best friend, who I believe is on the call still, she got me this, this book, and it's called No Goal Was Met Without a Little Sweat. So this is another sort of gratitude way of using this practice. And at the very top, it says, today I'm grateful for, and literally just has 3 places. It then has your goal for the day to live life fit, one thing you appreciate about your strong body, and then you rate your day. You reflect on your mood, your food, and your workout. And then there's a place to write if you're a journal person. So I know my friend Beth, who uses this, and her and I both have these affirmation cards that sometimes are great for using for journal writing if you need, you know, prompts. You can grab out, you know, these cards and say, it says, how have I shown my intelligence lately? How did others react? How did I feel in response? So having these prompts to use in terms of journal writing are also a great way to sort of get yourself going in terms of creating a gratitude journal and affirmations. And what I love is that both Beth and her daughter, Jess Stiefels, if you need to know, she has a podcast. And Beth, if you want to write it in the Q&A, feel free. But her daughter is on Instagram, and she has this place where people can be accountable in their gratitudes and journal writing, which I thought was really cool. So, you know, it's really simple to start out with. What are you grateful for? You know, it can be something really small. You're grateful that you woke up this morning. You're grateful that you had hot water in your shower. So, you know, you become more able to think about what you're grateful for when you've done this for a while. So I want you to pick up your pen for a minute and grab your piece of paper. You can turn it over if you filled it up. I want you to write down a person in your life that you're especially grateful for. And you don't have to write why, just write the person's name. Why is optional. So thinking about where you are in life today, different than where you were 2 months ago, what is one positive change you're thankful for? And then the last question is, what is something you're grateful for? What is something you're grateful to have learned this week? And for some, that might be a little more challenging. What did you learn about a person? What did you learn about yourself? What did you learn in a class? So just right now in what we've just done, you've started a gratitude journal. So my challenge to you is to find an empty notebook, start a Word document, just start a list. You know, in a book like this where there's a blank page, and just start listing the things that you're grateful for. And that can become your gratitude journal. You know, thinking about all of the different ways you can do it that would make it easy for you. And remember that why is always optional. But, you know, what are you grateful for? So connection. So it's such a loaded one. I feel like connection is so loaded right now. What we crave for is that human connection of like a person to touch. And, you know, I often think about my best friends and, you know, well, maybe we can social distance across the yard and maybe we can, you know, have happy hour and you can sit on one side of the yard and I'll sit on the other side of the yard and we'll wear masks and that'll be okay. But like in theory, I know that I can't hold back from touching that person because I haven't seen them in 2 months. So it probably isn't a good idea. So that idea of connection, it's really hard for me to think about that in-person connection. And so the connection has had to be all technology. And, you know, that comes with its curses and its blessings, because as we know, not everyone in the state has great internet connections and good bandwidth. I know that that's been a problem for some, especially when their kids are trying to do schoolwork or they have meetings at the same time. It gets to be a challenge. For me, one of the things that was really kind of neat and exciting was for the first time was doing Easter by Zoom. And I say exciting because there was, you know, we were all over the place, but we were still able to see each other at the same time and watch our little Nora do her Easter egg hunt. And, you know, 10 or 15 years ago, we probably would not have been able to do that. So I'm feeling, you know, pretty lucky that we have that. And FaceTime, because without FaceTime, I don't know what I'd do. So, you know, there is that way to be connected. And, you know, thinking in terms of strategy or practice and, how are we using it to stay in touch with families and children? It's definitely been something that I've been using to keep in touch with families and children. And as I've said, it comes with its challenges when you're trying to Zoom with a group. And you don't want to tell them to mute necessarily because you want to hear them, but the stress is real on a Zoom call. It gets loud. And so there are these new ways of connecting with parents. I think that it's a blessing, and we're lucky that we have this connection and that we can connect with other early educators in this way as well, whether informally or formally. I have my own family. My cousin has been meeting with her grown children and had happy hour last weekend on Zoom. So I loved the way they thought about connecting in that way. So, all right. So another activity time. So over the past couple months, there's obviously been discoveries or changes that have been made, either personally in your family or professionally, that you want to preserve, things that you don't want to let go of. So have you been focused on getting outside more, moving more? Have you been focused on making those connections? Have you been focused on meditating or praying? If you're a churchgoer, how have you taken care of that part of your spiritual self? And what about emotionally? What's working well for you? So I want you to just take a couple minutes and just kind of mull over that, and just take some notes, and I'm gonna just give you a minute of silence. Paula and Maria, I'm realizing that I sent the link to the class to someone that signed up, and she's showing up as me in the questions. So if you're wondering why, that's actually Beth Sanders, just so you know.
Yes, that's good to know.
That radio podcast is the one I spoke of by Jessica Thiefels, and that's actually Beth Sanders' daughter. She's on Instagram, she has a podcast, and she's just moved back to the area Monday. So check it out. I think that you will be, you'll really like that. Okay. Alrighty. So when I ask you what that thing is that you want to preserve, one of the things that has been, abundantly clear to me is that things are going to be different. We're not really sure how they're going to be different, but we know they're probably going to be different than they were when we said goodbye to the kids. So what are those activities or those discoveries or changes that you've made that you want to hold on to? So if you go to the Q&A, I want you to just share what some of those might be. Yes, Beth, that is you because it's not me. Calmer, better organization. Yes. Ooh, the group sizes. I like that. Back to family dinner, right? That's been a big one. We've all had to start making dinner a whole lot more. Maybe that's just my house. Daily walks. We've all been outside much more. And the idea of smaller group sizes is, yeah, I'm for that. Eating in classrooms. Increase time to communicate, move your body. Yes. So Mary, I like that you said to be happy, not sad. And one of the things that I wanted to take a little bit of time to talk about was if you get a moment to look up a YouTube, there's a YouTube, I believe it's a video. If you do a search, Martin Seligman on learned helplessness and learned optimism, there's probably articles too, but you know, the whole idea is that there's been studies done that people can learn to be helpless and victims of their own situations and because of their circumstances or whatever it might be. But we can also take those steps to, it's almost like tricking your brain into being optimistic and positive. And we can use different ways of doing that. And part of that is self-talk and visualization and gratitudes and some of the things that we've already talked about. But I definitely urge you all to check that out. Learned Helplessness and Learned Optimism, and Martin Seligman. So as we're kind of looking at this whole idea of wellness, I'd like to, when I am reflecting on this time, you know, I want to look at all of the different areas because, you know, I'm one of those people that I can be like really good at one thing for a really long time, but then I'm not so good at some of the others. I can focus on one thing and then kind of slip up on other things. So where is your focus, you know, in terms of wholeness? So as we take times to reflect on it, what are the different places? And this is almost like looking at that resilience plan and, you know, looking at where we're doing our best to put focus or not put focus. So what are the areas that we want to put more focus on that maybe we've been not keeping up with? So I'm going to give you a minute to just kind of soak that in. So as I'm thinking about this and thinking about what's happening next, I was sort of reflecting on my own process of figuring out what was going to be in here. And a lot of times I'm reflecting on my own journey. And sometimes I think to myself, I wonder if that's what everybody else is feeling, or is that just me? So as I'm sitting here thinking about this wheel that I've shown you, you know, I think about the places that I'm sort of focusing my energy, and you know, how I would be better at sort of focusing my energy more universally. And I'm not really sure that I have an answer for that, but if any of you do, I'd love to hear that. But it's something to think about. So, I want you to take a minute, and you don't have to write right now. I want you to imagine that we're exactly where we want to be, either personally or professionally, in 3 years' time. I want you to just imagine what that is, where that is, maybe personally and professionally. So I want you to just take some time. And then what are the 3 biggest things that we, you, I accomplished between now and then? And then I want you to think about ways that you've brought this to life. I want you to just sort of hold on to those thoughts for right now, because if we have time at the end, I want to revisit this. So I want to talk about changing the narrative. So this is a practice, and we're victims of the stories we tell ourselves, which, by the way, it's human nature. When we hear something negative or we see something negative, our attention goes towards that, and that's how we feel. That's just human nature. So, you know, one of the things that I think about a lot with different situations is, you know, the story that I've told myself. And let me give you an example. Perhaps you have just texted your friend, and they haven't gotten back to you. And so you're like, wow, that's weird. They haven't gotten back to me. Geez, I wonder what's going on. And then a little while later, you say to yourself, huh, I wonder if something happened. And then a little while later, you think, I wonder if she's mad at me. And then a little bit longer, you're like, she's totally mad at me. I don't know what I did, but oh my gosh, she's just not returning my phone call. I don't know why she's not doing that. I'm sure I said something to piss her off. Like, what did I do? I don't know what I did. Oh my gosh, she's never going to talk to me again. And then it becomes this big thing because we created this story. And really what's happened is that it's only been 20 minutes and the person just had to go outside for a few minutes, or, you know, do something like take care of their child or cook dinner. And so we tend to tell ourselves these stories. Another example of this is that growing up, school was very challenging for me. And probably nowadays, they would just say that I was a different type of learner, very visual, obviously. You can tell from my slides. So very visual. I needed to see things to understand them. And it was one of those things where when you're that type of learner and you go to take algebra, it just doesn't make sense. You're thinking to yourself, there's no way I can apply this to real life. And if I could, why am I? There must be an easier way. And so for years, I grew up telling myself that I was terrible at math. I stunk at math, that I really didn't need algebra or geometry for that matter. And that I was terrible at test taking. So this was my story throughout my entire life, was that I wasn't good in school, and I wasn't a good test taker, and I was terrible at math. Those were all of my like things about my reality, was that none of those things worked for me. So this went on until I was in my mid-30s. And then I decided to go back to school, and I was like, oh, I don't know if I can go back to school, because if I have to take a math test or any math class, I'm out. Like, I can't go to school if I have to take math. Like, forget it. So I persevered. I did go to school, and I did take math, and I passed. And I had a 4.0 average when I got my degree. And so it was these stories that I had told myself over time that I was bad at this. And so I convinced myself of that. I convinced myself that I wasn't a good student. I convinced myself that, I couldn't learn these techniques and these ideas. And really, it wasn't about that. It was just more about the way I was learning, and also the story that I was telling myself. For years, I had been just creating the negativity in my brain about what it was. And so I want you to think about the narrative in terms of the families we're working with. And, a lot of this comes with the assumptions that we might be making about a certain situation, or maybe a family story. So thinking about making sure that you have all the facts, and that you're not making it more negative or bigger than it needs to be. Making sure that you're not bringing the assumptions into your head that may not be necessarily true. They might be true, but they might not be true. So thinking about that narrative, and also, what Mary said earlier about, being happy, not sad. Like, this is another way that we can do that, is by changing that narrative in our head. When we wake up in the morning, and I'll tell you, here's the story that will cement that for you. And I know some of you have heard this story before, because I've used it in other trainings, but I took an appreciative inquiry certification, and during that certification, we were lucky enough to have access to different coaches and people that wrote books. And one of them was Jacqueline Kelms. She wrote The Joy of Appreciative Living, which is a great book. I know one participant is reading it right now. April Zacco is reading it right now. And we had this opportunity to talk to Jackie on the phone. And when we talked to her, she wanted to talk about her method that she uses in her appreciative living. And what she did was she asked for a volunteer. Nobody spoke up, so of course I did. And I spoke up, and she said, well, what's something you're having a hard time with right now? And I felt kind of silly saying it at first, but I said Mondays. Mondays are just so hard for me. They just suck, if I'm being honest. Like, kids show up and they're overtired, and it's like they've eaten crap all weekend, and I swear that they've just drank liquid sugar, and they don't nap, and then they come here and they're just so overtired, and there's just so many challenges throughout the day that it's terrible. And she asked me to rate it on a scale of 1 to 10. I think I said negative something. And then she asked me, how do I want to feel? She asked me about the emotions previously, and I was defeated. There were so many negative emotions. And she asked me how I wanted to feel. And I said, I just want to feel centered and balanced. And, I just want to feel I want to feel good. And she said, all right, well, how do you feel now? Well, just talking about how I wanted to feel made me feel a little bit better. So I had gone from negative to at least up a little bit. So at this point, then I was sort of in the positive again. So what she asked me to do was, she asked me when did I start thinking about Mondays? And I said, well, Saturday night I start thinking about the dreaded Monday and having to go back to work. Tuesday, everything's fine, but Mondays suck. And she said, okay, so Saturday night, I want you to start visualizing and doing some self-talk. And what that's going to look like is you saying those words over and over again about what you want to feel. You want to feel balanced. You want to feel centered, and all of these words. And I was like, all right, whatever you say, lady. And I was thinking to myself that it sounded a little kooky and crazy to me, but I was going to go along with it because that's just the kind of girl I am. So I went along with it. And so Saturday night came and I was like centered. I'm going to be centered. I'm going to be all of these things. Sunday came, same thing. Monday came and I just kind of approached the day, and Monday came and went. And what do you know? The day was good. And I thought, must be a fluke. Couldn't have been this. Must have been something else. Next week comes along and, I start to get that feeling again. And I said the same thing. I'm going to be balanced. I'm going to be centered. And lo and behold, the day came and went and it was good again. And I was like, wow, something's going on here. So in this appreciative inquiry process, we had to do like reflections on all of our activities. And probably it was maybe a month before the light bulb went on in my head. And I don't know why it took so long, but it did. That it wasn't the children at all. It was me. I was the one showing up on Monday, defeated before the day even started. So as soon as someone disagreed with something or was unhappy, I was like, oh, that's it. This is the worst day ever. And so I was showing up with like my glass empty with holes in it. So anytime anyone tried to fill my bucket up, it was just going right out. So it was me. It wasn't the children. It was my own approach that day. I was defeated before I even started. Before Monday even got there, I was talking myself out of that day. So thinking about your narrative in terms of anticipation and expectations, and also thinking about it in terms of, changing that narrative if you were going to, a family get together that you have to go to every year, but maybe you dread it. Thinking about maybe the things that you do look forward to about that family gathering. What are 3 things that you can look forward to? Is it spending time with your own children? Is it the food? What is it about that time? And thinking about changing your strategy about dealing with that certain annual event that always comes up. So that's just another way to kind of turn our attention to something else. So the idea of creating meaning in every day, each day, it's going to be different for me than it is for you. If you have children at home, it's definitely going to be very different. When this stay-at-home order started, I was all about making sure that each day was like super productive, and I couldn't waste any time because like I didn't have, like, this was something I don't normally have. So we've got to like clean every closet out, and we've got to, organize and paint the childcare space. And if we're going to have this amount of time, then we have to be productive. We can't waste it. And I kept asking myself, like, when was I ever going to get time like this again? But after almost a solid week of that, I became more and more down and sad and blue. And I was having a harder and harder time sort of finding meaning each day. I was like, wow, is this what I'm going to be doing every day for the next, several weeks, is, cleaning and painting. And so trying to find something that had deeper meaning each day besides, the cleaning and organizing that I wanted to do and felt like I had to do, but going deeper than that, whether it be the gratitude, but also, it could be going for a walk in the woods and seeing a certain bird. It could be having a conversation with somebody you haven't had in a long time. So thinking about that meaning in each and every day. So I want you to, this is what we just talked about. We talked about gratitude, the resilience plan, changing the narrative, connection, and create meaning in each day. So what I want to do now, I'm going to stop the share. I didn't know if, Maria, can we open the gallery up to see people if they want to be seen? Is that a possibility?
So we
Or
yes, kind of.
okay.
What's your or? Say that.
Or I can just use the Q&A.
We can do it so that people can raise their hands and we can unmute them.
That's perfect.
Would that's good. Okay, hold on. Give me 1 sec and I'll just
Okay.
Okay. So that function is now available to people.
Okay, great. Let me pull up the participants so I can see. Okay. So I'm wondering, in terms of the imagine that we did earlier, maybe if there's anyone that wants to share sort of in that looking forward, 3 years, what does that look like? Does anyone want to share? Oh, I'm seeing a couple. Okay. So do I unmute them or do you?
It's up to you. If you hover, do you see the allow to talk? If you hover over their name.
No, I don't see that.
Okay. Here, give me 1 sec and I
Sorry, guys.
Okay. All right. Now go ahead and try it.
Oh,
try
yeah,
the allow to talk. Okay.
Okay.
Great.
If you put your hand up and you want to put it up again, go ahead. So Louise, I have you on if you want to unmute.
Yes, I did. Can you hear me?
I can.
Okay, super.
Want to share your imagine?
I'm sorry, go ahead.
Do you want to share your imagine? Imagine where you'd be in 3 years?
Alive.
Oh, I like that. That's good to strive for.
I am currently, I've been on chemo treatment since early 2018.
Wow.
So for me to be alive in a few years will be my goal.
That's huge. So when you think about that, that's bigger than probably anything that I was thinking about. So what are 3 things that you would want to accomplish between now and 3 years?
Let's see. I really look forward to time with my family, just appreciating that time that I have. I also am looking forward to less side effects from treatments. And yeah, just, I don't know, you think differently, I think. So for me, it's just, being appreciative of what I have.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Have you found any, do you think that that's the bright spot for you in this, is that you have figured out sort of those places to be appreciative?
Yes. My family, who's been very supportive in lots of areas. So definitely, just really, appreciating those who are supportive.
Well, thanks for sharing.
Thank you.
Does anyone anyone else want to share? Okay, so one of the other areas that I wanted to sort of touch base on was some of the resilience skills that we talked about, and I'm wondering if anyone wants to talk about sort of what resonated with them or what they think is going to be sort of the most helpful as they move forward. Okay, Natanya. Natanya, oh, there you go.
Hello.
Hi.
So I absolutely loved the gratitude piece, and I really resonated with what you said about how it works just really seamlessly for some, and for others it takes more practice. I thought that made a lot of sense, because it was definitely a piece for me where like once I jumped in and committed to either writing things down every day or just finding moments for pause and gratitude, it just clicked. It's like, oh, this works. But I'm also like very much an optimist. And another piece that I feel I really appreciated you sharing was the rewriting your story. And I kind of aligned that with the whole like rumble process that Brene Brown talks about. And I just feel like that's something that comes up every day. I loved your on the phone example of like your friend not responding to your text. I feel like that can happen in so many different spaces and scenarios throughout our days, whether it's somebody who cuts us off, like when we're driving, or, you know, not being able to figure out what we're going to eat tonight.
Yes, exactly. I mean, how quickly we can jump to conclusions.
Yeah, and realizing that these are patterns, right, that we can work on. I thank you for just keeping it so practical.
Yeah, I mean, I totally, I mean, and this is all, you know, this isn't stuff that's come naturally for me either. Mm-hmm. You know, optimism and positivity, I can say they can come pretty naturally, but there's other things that maybe don't. Writing gratitudes down is a struggle for me.
Yeah.
That as a constant. And, but I say them in my head, but putting them on paper, I'm definitely not so great at. But it's, yeah, all of this stuff is a practice. So thanks for sharing.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, anybody else? Oh, this is actually Beth. Beth, you can unmute.
I just did. Okay, you said you wanted us. You asked us about the resiliency skills.
Yes.
And I can't hear you now. Can you hear me?
I can hear you.
Oh, okay. And you talked about connection, and I think that for me, that has been a huge piece in this whole pandemic situation. We have as well. I also have an early ed program in Burlington, and we have every Tuesday night we have a board meeting with my 6 little tribe members, and I think it's not enough, as you said, but I think just talking with friends and family and having this Zoom and FaceTime and all that is huge. I don't know where I would be without all of that.
Yeah, I agree. I've definitely been more, and you know, because it's you that I'm FaceTiming with, but you know, being able to see that person face to face and, you know, hearing the wise ass comments from the person and the peanut gallery is definitely
right.
You feel like you're right there with them. So,
right.
That. And when we did the imagine question, where you imagine where you want to be personally or professionally in 3 years, what were you thinking about?
I was thinking about being retired someplace nice and warm and sunny.
I should have known. Okay. Well, thank you for sharing.
You're welcome.
All right. Is there anyone else that would like to share? Oh, Suzanne.
Okay, this is going to be weird, but I'm not exactly sure how to explain it. It's almost like the time to organize and then not wanting to organize. It's sort of like now we have time to reflect on all these things about what we might want to do and how we're doing it. And it's almost like it's easier when I'm so busy I don't have time to reflect on that. So it's sort of like going back and forth between I'm grateful for having this time to think about what I want to do and how I want to do it. And at the same time, it'd be sort of like, but if I was just busy, I wouldn't have to do it.
Right. Well, I can definitely hear what you're saying and where you're coming from. There's times that in the last several weeks, I felt more busy than when I have children here.
Yeah.
And I think it's because there's so many Zoom calls and, being sort of in front of a screen, which I've had to sort of like step back away from and be like, whoa, I need a break because I'm not used to this. But I can totally feel where you're coming from. And for me, it was definitely, I felt like I needed to be so productive because I don't usually have this time. And when will I ever have this time again?
Right.
I'm kind of afraid to say, knock on wood. But, for me, it was like, I can't waste this time. And also over the holiday break, I had been sick the entire time. So like nothing happened then. So yeah, there was a lot of this like feeling helpless. What do I do? So I totally get where you're coming from. Thank you, Susan. Pamela. Hi, Pam.
Hi. I can definitely echo the last person who was talking, the busyness and almost, I have packed my schedule with so much stuff that I feel like I've made it overwhelming to myself. And it's like I did it to myself because I feel like I want to be busy. I want to stay productive. I want to stay current in what's happening. And I feel like I'm definitely trying to find that balance. I have 3 young kids, and I feel like today I'm taking the time to redo my kitchen and organize it while I'm doing this training. So I feel like I'm trying to get some things crossed off my to-do list that I wouldn't necessarily have the time for. I'm trying to still be productive.
Right. I think that I totally understand where that feeling of, if we're getting that stabilization payment, oh my gosh, then we need to use this time effectively. And I have to get all of the professional development in I can. And then before I know it, like I've committed myself to a lot development and to a class that I was like, wait a minute, I thought this was going to be easier than it was. And it's not. Wait, I have to take notes. What do you mean? So, there's situations where, it's like we're way busier. So there's times where I'm like, I'm ready for the kids to come back so we can play in the sandbox.
Exactly.
Thanks for sharing, Pam. Hi, Amy.
Hi. I just kind of want to, both Pam and Sue made some good points, and I feel more scattered now than I did when I was working full time, and managing 2 programs and running my husband's books and doing all that. I feel we are providing EP care, so we're still open. And it seems that, maybe I took too much on, like everyone's kind of saying, but going back to like focusing on your wholeness, I feel that I haven't touched on anything other than, and I put, I think in the chat, because I'm not quite sure how to do the Q&A. And again, this is all like learning because I'm not, I don't do Facebook, I don't do, so I haven't gotten in that Facebook rut because I don't do Facebook, which is nice. But I haven't focused on anything that makes me whole other than my professional. It's almost like you have to say, especially working more at home, because when I'm not at the center, I'm working at home. I have to like shut the door and say, okay, I'm shutting the computer off so I can go have dinner with my family, because that's what has been like the strength, having our college daughter home, because she's you know, obviously remote learning like everyone else. But it feels like I can work 24/7. And that was a real eye opener for me, having, I need to take some time for me emotionally and physically. And I have not been feeling well, so I'm not quite sure if I'm just getting run down and all of this stuff. So this workshop came at a good time.
Oh, I'm glad.
And it has a lot of pertinent information that can go to the staff, hopefully, when we get back, because I feel that the staff are going to feel overwhelmed quickly, because they're not going to have been, you know, I have some staff that haven't worked since the middle of March, and I've had some staff that I'm trying to just rotate certain staff through the EP.
Right.
And I feel that the people that haven't worked, when we get back to normal, are going to be overwhelmed more quickly than if we had stayed normal.
Yes.
So, thank you.
I appreciate that. Thank you for sharing. One of the things that Amy made me think about, and I think I mentioned it when we were talking sort of about that cycle of grief, is just like that everybody can be in a completely different place in terms of change and, you know, our relationship to change, and how fast we go through it. And so that's something to keep in mind as you're dealing with staff, or, you know, just people in general, like where they are in terms of all of this. And the fact that we're all going through it at the same time is a challenge, because it makes for a lot of emotion, a lot of feelings. And, you know, as we deal with families, and I say deal with families, as we work with families, you know, the idea that, you know, the stress that they're under trying to do their job with a toddler under their feet, you know, needing them or wanting them. You know, one thing that I said this morning on a call was that I think that if we look at the bright side, is that we're going to see a lot of kids come through this that learn how to play independently, which is something maybe they've lacked before. So we're going to see that. And, you know, also thinking in terms of, you know, grieving, for me, I started to think about when I was FaceTiming with one of the children that I take care of, when he left here, you know, he was starting to pull himself up on things, but he hadn't quite started crawling. He's almost walking now. He's signing and he's saying words. And my thought was that, like, he's not going to be the same child when he comes back. And so, you know, there was part of me that was, you know, feeling really sad about that, and feeling really sad about the fact that, you know, I'm missing this period of time. And the other thing is, you know, the sadness I'm feeling for missing the time with the children or the child that's moving on. You know, it's precious time when you've had a family for 7 years, and then, you know, a child is moving on at the end of the summer, but you're missing this precious time with them. So, yes, there's a lot of feelings in that. So it's 2:55, and I wanted to give everyone a chance if there's any last words. Does anyone want to share anything? You can put your hands up. Everybody's quiet. That's unusual. So, oh, there's a hand. Hi, Louise. Louise.
I unmuted myself, sorry. I just wanted to thanks so much for taking your time. I really appreciate what I've learned today. I think resilience is a big thing that everyone needs, and something I, you know, was really, really craving right now. The information.
I'm so glad that it was helpful. I'm so glad that it was helpful for you, Louise, and I'm sending you lots of strength right now.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it.
You're welcome. All right. So I want to just say thank you to all of you for coming on today. I appreciate it. It's cathartic for me as well. to put this together and do it with you. So I want to just say thank you. And I think that's all I have. Paula, did you want to?
Yeah, I have just a couple of final thoughts. Yeah, again, thanks everyone for attending. I know Zoom is new to a lot of people, me included. I'm still learning all those details. So a really big shout out to Maria Richards from Let's Grow Kids. She has been key to making these webinars possible. She's helped coordinate, get them set up, and then she is our technical assistance through all of our PD webinars. So we could not do this without her.
Yeah,
so
thanks, Maria.
yeah, and thank you, Ellen. And again, just a couple of quick notes. We'll follow up with a survey probably later this week. I promise it's really quick. If people wouldn't mind responding, just to give us a little bit of feedback with how our webinars are going, that would be great. We'll also send out a certificate of completion for anyone who wants a DPD for your records. Again, a reminder that does not have to go to Northern Lights. All they need is the attendance, which again, I will submit. And for updates and things, continue to check the Let's Grow Kids website. We have our COVID-19 page dedicated to updates and resources, and we have a great team keeping that, kind of new and frequent as we get new information. If anyone has questions or needs anything, feel free to email me, Paula at letsgrowkids.org. And again, thanks for joining us, and everyone enjoy the rest of your day and stay well.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ellen. Bye, everyone.